Hey and welcome to my channel where I experiment with different materials and techniques. In my previous video I made Misa Amane's lace gauntlets out of latex, which was a very fun and interesting project, and this time we are making her dress out of latex as well. In this video we are recreating this dress, which in the show is probably supposed to be satin, but I've seen costumes made of shiny vinyl too. I tried my best to collect source images from all angles, but even if something is very clear in my head, I might want to draft my own version just to think through the structure and to visualize how different parts connect to each other, as working with latex is very different from sewing fabric. Normally I start drafting my pattern straight on paper, but with this project I thought it would be easier for me to use a technique I've used when making corsets. Here I wrap my torso with some plastic wrap, and then I use some painter's tape to tightly wrap around my torso. You should use a very light top underneath, or otherwise it could affect your measurements, and the tape should follow the contours of your body as closely as possible. This way we can decide where we want to have seams on our final garment, and it allows us to preserve or even exaggerate the curves if we want to. Here I have drawn separate cups for the bust that will have a seam in the middle. The seam could probably go horizontally as well. The main goal here is just to get pattern pieces that lay flat. I've also drafted the general shape of the neckline, and on the other side of my body I've marked where I want to have the panels of the bodice. Then you need someone to draw a straight vertical line at the middle of your back, and they should also help you by cutting along that line so that you can remove the wrap. The wrap retains its shape after being removed, and in order to turn it into pattern pieces, we need to cut it so that when spread on the table, the pieces lay completely flat. This way we can create the same curves on our final piece. I will also remove a tiny bit at the waistline. This might look like an insignificant amount to remove, but if I do this to all the panels, I have removed this amount 12 times, so it will add up really quickly. At this point, it's also important to label all your panel pieces so you know which way and order they should be glued together. I'm using a French curve to connect the top of the cup to the back. I will then start to cut off the pattern pieces. I only need the pieces for the other side of the body, as I can just turn over the patterns and cut out the panels for the other side. For the front, I wanted to make a wider panel, so I just made sure that it was somewhat symmetrical. Here I'm demonstrating how the cup pattern should lay completely flat once they are divided in two. And here I'm just cutting a bit off of the waistline from all the panels. This should make the waistline a bit curvier. This and the fact that I didn't add any seam allowance but will glue these panels together by overlapping them will make this bodice part snug enough. To check my math, I measured all the pieces and also taped them to each other the way the latex would be glued together. Next, I'm going to trace all these patterns on paper, as it would be difficult to trace these directly on latex. Once I have cut out the paper patterns, I trace them on latex and cut out the pieces. I cut out panel pieces for both sides of the body, and I cut out two of the front panels, as the other one will become the part that holds grommets and lacing. Before I added the grommets, I sandwiched a piece of rubberized cotton between the latex. This is a technique I learned from Morgan Donner's video, where she made a latex dress with a lot of grommets. I'm linking her video in case you want to learn more about grommets and latex, but basically this helps to distribute the tension so that the latex doesn't rip. The cotton needs at least a day to dry, and then I'm going to glue them on these flaps, and then once the fabric is sandwiched, I will have to let the glue cure at least a day too. Here is where I want to remind you about certain metals affecting latex. Ideally, your grommet should be stainless steel, but it was very difficult for me to find any in this particular size, as most of them are made for boats, and those grommets tend to be a lot bigger. I did find some listings on Amazon, but based on the reviews they might not actually be stainless steel, so I made a conscious choice to use these brass grommets I already had. Since brass contains copper and probably traces of iron and other metals as well, it can stain lighter latex and in general could cause the latex to break down. How fast this can happen varies, and some people say that moisture plays a part in it as well. I thought it would be interesting to see if any damage over time even happens, so I was willing to take the risk this time. I'm using a leather puncher to make a hole for the grommet, and I press them down with this hand tool that is supposed to be high quality, but it gave me so much trouble. I kept squeezing the tool, but my grommets would just fall off until I realized that the tool has to be carefully aligned, or otherwise it will not even go all the way down. I had been squeezing so hard that my palms were bruised, and it took me a whole day to get the grommets in place because of this stupid tool. Once my palms and my spirit was healed, I glued these grommet flaps on the front panel. Then I start attaching all the panels together. Here you want to make sure that you are attaching the right panel right way around to the right side in the right order. And now that I had removed some material from the panels, some of the seams were a bit curvier, so I made sure that they would have an even 1 centimeter overlap throughout the length of the seam. Once the bodice was assembled, I glued together the cups and attached them to the bodice. Here you also want to make sure that you glue the right cup on the right side. Next, I'm adding a zipper. Nothing special here other than the zipper will continue down to the skirt. This way it's easier to get the dress on without having to stress out the waistline too much. For the skirt part, I didn't have a pattern. I wanted to make a circle skirt like I did for my 2B and Wednesday Addams cosplay, but I felt like I should try something else this time. In the anime it looks like Misa's skirt is just a bunch of fabric that has been gathered at the waistline, and I thought I could try to do that with the latex as well. So here I have basically cut out a rectangle that is approximately 2.5 times longer than the waist circumference, and I'm pleating the material as I glue it down. This is kind of what I did on my Sailor Venus video, but instead of adding glue to the folds, I'm allowing the pleats to flow. I then added a thin strip of latex on top to make the seam look a bit nicer and also to lock down those pleats. I also added some trim to the cups and the back, as Misa's design seemed to have some kind of a bias tape in those areas as well. I often have trouble with zippers as they create wrinkles at the back, so first I wanted to add corset boning to give some rigidity to the area, but they were a bit too long for this design, so I thought I should try zip ties instead. I used this method in my Near Automata dress video and it works surprisingly well, so here I'm rubberizing some zip ties, and once they are dry I make sure to add another layer so that they don't poke through. Then I cover them and the fabric part of the zipper with strips of latex. At first I wanted to add removable bra straps so that I could adjust them if needed, but then I realized that I don't have removable bra straps. Anyway, I made straps out of latex and they match the whole look better anyway. I also don't have to worry about them snapping, as most of the support should come from the bodice and not from the straps themselves. Then it was time to add the satin ribbon to the front and let the dress dry for a couple of days before trying it on. So I tried the dress on the next week and it looked pretty good, but there were a couple of things that were bothering me. The cups were a bit too loose, and this was because when I first wrapped the tape around me, I wasn't able to fully capture the curves as the neckline of the shirt I was wearing pushed the wrap away from my body. Another thing that is not very obvious in the footage is that the skirt part looks nice and full at the front, but quite flat at the back. This is due to having more pleats at the front, but overall this dress could use just a bit more fabric to achieve a fuller look. I'm about to run out of black latex though, so we need to try to work around the problem. So I took apart the straps and the trim and removed some material from the top of the cups to make them fuller, and I also took apart the trim at the waistline and all the ruffles of the skirt, and this time I tried to make more even ruffles and guide a bit more volume towards the back. And once all the alterations were done, I'd wait another 3 days before I got to try the dress on again. Here's the final dress, but let's take a quick look at the modifications. The skirt part would look a lot better with an extra yard of fabric, but the pleats at the back look a lot better than they did before. This is what the dress looks like on its own, and here you can see it with a petticoat. With the petticoat you can tell that the front is lacking in pleats, but with the limited material I'm working with, the results I think are acceptable. The cups fit me better now and they aren't gaping anymore. The bodice fits me surprisingly well too, as I was 100% expecting to mess up something now that I was working with this many seams. One thing I realized later was that I forgot to add the grey trim on Misa's dress, but I also didn't make latex lace stockings, which would, by the way, be an insane project. And yes, the lace on my gauntlets is latex and I made them entirely myself. So if you're interested in how I did that, click on to the next video. And if you'd like to see more crafting like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well. Let me know what you think of this dress, and as always, thank you for watching and happy crafting!